Well, recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is a surprise episode 56 of Registry Matters. Hey, Larry, what's up with you tonight?
Oh, just getting ready for Christmas. Trying to wrap up everything so I can get out of this place for a week or so.
Listen, I have this thing. So I was a musician for a gazillion years, way into my 20s, and I played in the military band. I've played so many Christmas songs that it is kind of my objective that I will not listen to any Christmas music when I go out, and I desperately avoid Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. I desperately. Do you know this song?
I have heard it, yes.
Okay, wow. If you hadn't heard that one. Okay, so I'm at Waffle House yesterday morning for breakfast, and some guy in some festive gear shows up, and he goes over to the jukebox. I was like, man, this is not going to go well. And he played something, and then the freaking next song on there, Grandma Got Run Over. I was like, I just have to get out of here. And I was on my way out, so I didn't have to stomach much of it. And I wonder if I only listen to like a minute of it, can I still claim I haven't heard it?
I think you can.
God, I hate that song.
And I can explain the logic. If you only listen to a minute of it, you haven't listened to the song. It's kind of like cookies. If you eat the broken pieces of a cookie, if a cookie has 180 calories and 9 grams of fat, if you just eat the broken pieces, you haven't eaten a cookie. So those don't count against your dietary.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Doesn't that make sense? That you're not eating a cookie, so you're not getting the 180 calories.
Okay, yeah. So if you eat like 2 halves, then it doesn't count?
Well, you want to even get the smaller pieces because the smaller they are, then they don't count for sure. So you eat just a whole bunch of little small pieces, and those would not accrue towards your calorie count.
Put it in a Ziploc bag and smash the shit out of it, and then so that doesn't count at all?
Very little. Because you're not eating a full cookie. You're eating just portions, and they don't count because I think the calories kind of leak out when they break.
Oh, okay. All right. I like that plan. Well, so here we are with a surprise episode. Totally didn't plan on recording. I know I've been getting chastised in the chat about, oh, you lied to us. Yeah, shut up. But Senate passed a bill last night, so I asked Larry if we could throw together something here real quick. I'm going to say quick, so we're going to make it less than one flipping over of the tape, Larry, if you catch my meaning. And
I get your meaning.
We're going to cover this and pretty much only this. I got 2 other little notes to cover. Merry Christmas and stuff it. Here's an extra bonus episode for yourselves. But so the first thing is I totally forgot to do this, but one of our patron supporters, Justin, had increased his contribution, and I just wanted to make sure that we said thank you and you're amazing. And then also just to throw in there, look, it would just show appreciation. Kick in $1 over at patreon.com/registry matters. Larry and I put a lot of effort into it. Just $1, but anything more is greater than that. But just $1 is fine. So then to move on, another Patreon supporter, Dave, up in Wisconsin, he kicked in a question that he's been having with a woman up there, and I'm not really sure the backstory behind the woman. But he says, living in Wisconsin, where GPS for life isn't considered punishment, I'd like to know more about how GPS, works. In a state that doesn't have a tiered system, who decides that someone is put on it for life? And if that happens, how does one appeal? Maybe you already answered these questions on Registry Matters. If so, I haven't been able to find the segment. So how do they determine who gets to be on GPS for life up there?
It's a great question because it's many questions buried in there. And this will take the entire time for the podcast tonight, but I love it, so I don't mind doing it. The GPS, it depends on why you have the GPS and what if it comes to you through your registration requirements, which a few states have got it in that registered offenders at a certain level would have to have GPS, and it's only, now listen very carefully, if it's only by virtue of your registry requirements and not any supervising requirements like community supervision for life, CSL. If it's only a part of the regulatory scheme, remember the regulatory scheme is whatever state you're living in. So if you had a GPS requirement that accrued to you by virtue of the registry requirements, that regulatory scheme would dissolve once you get into the new state. because as I've given the example about you taking your nasty car from an arid state like Colorado or Utah or Nevada to a congested state like New Jersey, where they do emissions inspections on practically everything that drives, your exemption in Arizona is of no value, vice versa. So his registry requirements will revert to whatever they are in the state that he lives in. Now, I got to throw in a little caveat, because Wisconsin has this notion that they can continue to enforce their fees. They don't try to tell you that you have to register in conformance with all of our requirements, as far as I know. What they tell you need to return the form annually, along with the verification of your address, along with either it's a $50 or $100 fee. Now that, I believe, is blatantly illegal. But until, as we always say, can they do that? They can do that. They can do that until they're stopped from doing it. And I would like to stop them from doing it. And what we're lacking is, well, actually, I've got some people in Wisconsin who are willing to challenge it. What we're lacking is the financial wherewithal, because litigation of this nature will cost some significant bucks. Not as much as a full-throated challenge to the registry itself, but it would cost some money. But I'd like to see that challenge. So if his GPS is accruing to him because of supervision requirements, those go with you to whatever state you go to. Remember, the conditions of supervision, not registration, but supervision, are whatever the state that they imposed on them, that state doesn't get cut out of the loop. Wouldn't it be a great system if you could have probation in Alabama where they're tough, and then you could decide to go to a state like Vermont where they're a little bit more reasonable, and you got to jettison the conditions Alabama? Wouldn't you have a mass exodus of people going from the states that were harsh to the states that were easy? So you
would have state shopping for sure.
So your supervision conditions and the duration of your supervision go with you, in addition to any conditions that the state that you choose to be supervised in want to apply to you, as long as they're consistent with what they would have applied to an offender who had a similar offense convicted there. They can't just willy-nilly start adding conditions because they don't like offenders to move there. But if it's consistent with what they would have applied to a person with that type of conviction, they can do that in addition to the conditions you bring with you. But those conditions follow you. So I hope that convoluted answer helps.
Oh my God, dude! Yeah,
helps Dave.
I'm thinking, yeah, you just took the Mississippi and you dug in and you got mud and you made it. Well, it was already muddy.
I don't understand what's muddy about it.
Oh my God, dude, that is like I have heard. I haven't actually expressed this to you, but it is generally my understanding, and I know that I'm wrong. I don't know that I'm wrong. It is generally my understanding that while on supervision, when you move to the destination state, you will follow their probation rules. And then when you're off of supervision, you will follow the rules of the state that you came from. And when we covered this 4-ish episodes ago, you flipped that entirely over. And I'm going to just leave it at that. I'm completely confused.
Don't leave it. There's nothing to be confused about. The conditions, when a state sentences you, and we need to always take registration out because that's not your sentence.
Right.
But when a state sentences you to 10 years of probation with a condition that you do X, Y, and Z special conditions, those go with you no matter where you go.
Special conditions.
And the duration, the 10 years of probation, sure, and all the conditions that the state of your conviction imposed on you, those go with you.
While under supervision.
While under supervision. In addition, the state that you go to can put conditions on you on top of those, as long as they're consistent with what they would have imposed had you been sentenced there for that type of offense. So you get double indemnity because they're obligated to enforce all the conditions that were originally imposed on you, plus they can add conditions as long as they're not trying to thwart the transfer process. They can't willy-nilly just invent conditions and say, well, if you come here, we're going to make you do this. But if they do generally apply that condition with that type of offense, they can say, in addition, these special conditions will apply to you. And you do not have to move there.
Right. I'm with you on that.
You can tell them to take their special conditions and where they can put them. You
can say FYP.
Yeah, you absolutely can do that.
And then,
but if you do that, they're going to tell you that we're going to decline the supervision. We're ordering you to return back to the state where you were convicted.
Right. Well, I mean, I was saying you could say FYP and not move there to begin with. That's your prerogative to do that.
Generally, though, you don't know what they're imposing on you till you get there. What you do is you
Fair
sign
enough.
an application saying that you agree to
Yeah.
be bound by any conditions imposed in the receiving state. And
Yeah.
when you get there, that's when they present you those conditions. You generally do not know. And you can tell them when you're sitting there, you can say, absolutely not. I would never have come here. And they'll say, fine, we're giving you reporting instructions to go back to where you came from. You don't have to agree to these conditions.
I'm with you. So then post supervision, say you're moving from a state that has residency restrictions and you're moving to a state that doesn't have them.
You no longer have the registry restrictions are only imposed by the state that where you're registering. The regulatory scheme is whatever the state that you're living in chooses to do.
All right.
You can have a lifetime registration in Georgia and you could, or Florida, and you could go to Vermont and it could become 10 years because Florida doesn't control.
But what about like the living? Is that in the case of
Florida
Georgia
doesn't
having
control
1,000?
that. Georgia doesn't control that. Vermont does.
And Vermont not having, I'm assuming they don't have residency restrictions, then you would move there and you're free to live wherever you want?
Well, Vermont would tell Georgia that if it was a condition of supervision. Now,
I was saying post supervision.
Well, Vermont doesn't give a damn about Georgia when you move there. They have no interest in Georgia's registration requirement.
Okay.
They tell you what theirs are.
Okay. I'm pretty sure. I think I'm back to where I was before. Of like you're gonna follow the most restrictive set of rules. You're gonna take the rules from where you're coming from while you're on supervision. You're gonna take the rules from where you're coming from, and you're gonna add them probably or possibly to the rules of where you're going. So now you've got a double set of rules, and then post supervision, it's only going to be the rules of where you're going.
The registration requirements of where you're living.
And that would include residency restrictions.
If they have any.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah. Now, there's always an exception to every rule. The state of Utah, for example, makes your duration of registration what it was in the state of conviction. They have a specific carve-out, and there may be other states. I can't keep track of 50 registration schemes without doing research, but I can. That one I've done research lately, and it has a carve-out. They don't want you to gain an advantage to come to Utah. You can come to Utah all you want to, but if you're a lifetime, your registration obligation in Florida, they classify as your lifetime in Utah. You're not going to get the 10-year benefits. You're not going to come there for early withdrawal.
Okay.
I don't agree with that. I believe there could be litigation that would overturn that. But as we have said so many times before, you can finish the sentence.
I'm with, can they do it? And they can do it until they're told to stop or until they are stopped, until they're litigated into stopping.
Yes, I believe that a person who has a non-Utah conviction has a potential equal protection clause argument that they could make. Will it work? I don't know. It's a plausible enough claim that you wouldn't get laughed out of court. But I think that's one claim that could be made. But until that claim is made and litigated and taken up on appeal, we don't know whether they can do that. But we know that they're doing it until they're stopped, and they haven't been stopped. So yes, they can do that until they're stopped.
Is there anything going back to Dave's question that did we get too far sidetracked?
I think we covered his questions. He says in a state that doesn't have a tiered system, who decides to put someone for life? And it's that's a very simple answer. Your registration obligation will be whatever the state that you move to says it is, without regard to Wisconsin. And when I say without regard, I don't mean without any regard, because they are going to look. Many states have equivalency language. It'll say it's reasonably, substantially, or equivalent to, and they're going to look at that conviction to try to figure out what you would fall in if they have a tiered system. If they have a various duration of registration, it wouldn't matter in Florida because everybody's life. So they would just tell you get registered, and prepare to come in every quarter for life. But if you go into a state where, depending on the offense, it would have an impact on how long you're going to be registering and how frequently you'd be reporting, then they are going to look at the Wisconsin to try to make that equivalency determination. But otherwise, the basic answer is the state that you're living in is going to decide what tier or what your duration is, and you may have to litigate that. Because we talked about that, was it the last episode or the week before, the last couple of episodes, we talked about this Meredith versus Stein out in North Carolina.
Yes. Yep.
And that's such a fantastic case because the states generally don't have good translation of out of state, and they tend to over translate and make sure that they give you the worst possible translation. And most people have insufficient resources, and they just accept it. Well, they said I'm alive. Well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. You might not be a lifetime.
Do me a favor. Can you give me an example? I hope you can. Of where two things are effectively equivalent, but they've been languaged differently.
Well, it'd be like criminal sexual penetration versus rape.
Okay.
The nuanced language would we call it in our state criminal sexual penetration. You could call it sexual assault. You could call it all different kind of names on sexual offenses. So you have to get into.
When we go back to North Carolina, we're talking about some barely high school graduated guy with like some corn stalk in his mouth, and like, yep, you got convicted with. I can't read these big words.
Corruption of a minor is what it was in Washington. He said, and of course, I'm still dismayed that the person would go to a second sheriff's office after the first one had told him he didn't have to register. I mean, that is beyond me. But he moves to another county and says, "Oh, I'll go to the sheriff's office again." Now, y'all really mean I don't have to register, don't you?
Just wanted to make sure. Merry Christmas. Okay. Yeah. All right. How'd that work out for you?
Yeah, there's no process. And the state said that they don't have to provide a process. Well, the federal court disagreed. They said if you're going to have that language saying that it has to be substantially similar, then you better have a process that allows for that determination to be made. Of course, the easiest solution is to take that language out and just say if you have to register anywhere, you have to register in North Carolina, and then they don't have to have a due process because it's already been determined by the fact that you have a registration obligation upon arrival.
Gotcha. All right.
Then I would come back and litigate that if I were in the position to. I would say, well, actually, you have a double registration in North Carolina now because you've got a lot of states that have a broader list than what North Carolina has. So you're registering people for things in North Carolina that are not registrable had they been convicted here. So there again, we have an equal protection issue because if you're a North Carolina citizen, you don't have to register for making obscene phone calls. If you had that conviction in Georgia, you have to register in North Carolina simply because they've eliminated this substantially equivalent determination. So I don't know that it would win.
God, Jesus.
But I know that it won't win if it isn't tried. If there's no attempt.
It's so freaking complicated, Larry.
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
Yeah, I know. That's why I keep you on the payroll, keeping you fat, dumb, and happy. Well, not except for the dumb part and fat. And generally not happy. Wait a minute. All right. Well, we had this, it happened kind of late last night. I saw like around 10 o'clock that it had happened an hour ago. So I'm assuming that they were running into late sessions. I mean, I guess they're trying to close up shop. I guess it would go home probably this weekend, right?
Well, for Christmas break, and they can come back if they need to.
Right.
Senator McConnell's trying to avoid that. He would like to do the continued resolution and not have to come back. If they do come back, though, they can stay in session all the way up to the new Congress is sworn in January 3rd. They can stay in session after Christmas if they need to.
Well, sometime last week you called me and you told me that Turtle had decided to bring this bill to the floor for a vote after Lindsey Graham had been saying, "Hey, dummy, bring it to the floor. There's 80 people. You got 80 votes." And it turned out that it was more than 80 votes. They even passed it with 87. And the first thing that I want to highlight is, I guess it would be Larry is right, but that of the dissenters, you had 12 and they were all for Team Red.
What does Team Red mean? Just so we're clear.
Well, Team Red, so we have two colored parties. We have a blue team and a red team, and blue's Democrats and reds are Republicans.
Oh, okay.
So I call them, so instead of using other derogatory terms like Democrat or, the Republican, I just call them Team Red and Team Blue because in many ways they're both equally evil or misinformed, misguided, whatever. So I choose those terms, though I do generally align myself one way versus the other. But so Team Red voted against it.
Well, fortunately for the First Step Act, even though they had to do, as I understand, now believe me, this is so complicated in terms of the legislation. Anybody who pretends they know what they voted for or knows what's in this is being very disingenuous. They don't. Not a single senator knows what they voted for. But in terms of this, I understand from what the balanced reporting that I look at sources that they had to do some additional narrowing and take out some more offender categories. and they had to do modifications to get this through the Senate. But the very conservative senators, since it's only 12 of them, let's just name them for the sake it won't take.
You're gonna shame them. All right then.
Senator Richard Shelby from the great state of Alabama was a nay. Senator Lisa Murkowski from the great state of Alaska was a nay. Senator Dan Sullivan from the great state of Alaska was a nay. Senator John Kyle. John Kyle is a former senator who has been given a temporary seat of John McCain's seat. Senator
okay,
John
that's the
Kyle,
guy. Okay, and he's retiring here in a couple weeks too, right? He's the one that's stepping down.
Oh well, I understood it was going to be temporary, but until they could find someone else. But I'm not sure when he's stepping down. But Kyle was an A. Tom Cotton from Arkansas was an A. Marco Rubio from Florida was an A. James Rich from what state is he from? Idaho.
It's Idaho.
John Kennedy from Louisiana. Ben Sass from Nebraska. Mike Rounds from South Dakota. John Barrasso from Wyoming, and Michael Enzi from Wyoming. So both of your Wyoming senators were against it.
Same with both of your Alaska.
And both your Alaska senators. And the one that I feel, being that it's such an overwhelming vote, hopefully he doesn't get demagogued too good, but Senator Doug Jones in Alabama, who won the special election to replace the now fired Attorney General James Sessions, who held the seat. He won the special election against the flawed candidate Roy Moore.
Yeah, that's good times there.
He will be demagogued in a very conservative state. Alabama borders Arkansas, and Arkansas is where the bastion of opposition was, and I suspect Senator Jones will get a lot of negativity thrown at him in his election, which comes up in 2020, about how he's for turning loose a tidal wave of criminals on the state of Alabama.
Well, that's what Tom Cotton was doing, though. Tom Cotton was running around beating a drum that this is going to let out a gazillion people, and it's just going to be terrible. You're going to have this flood of crime going through your streets by enacting this legislation. And before we get into the details, we're going to take a teeny little detour to set up super duper conservative talk show host Rush Limbaugh. And it does get tied together, and you have some points to attach to it. So let's listen to what Rush has to say.
And so a lot of people are hoping that the judge will recognize similar prosecutorial misconduct here and throw it out. That's what people were hoping to be thrown out. Flynn doesn't want it thrown out. I don't think Flynn thinks everything against him would be thrown out. So he's adamant. Look, this is how I think Flynn's scared to death, folks. In his situation, there's no way he can battle these people. He's already down. He's lost his life's work. He's lost much of his financial security. He's lost his house. And the last thing that happened was that Mueller threatened to go after his son. And so, you reach a point where no matter how principled you are, you don't have the resources to carry on such a fight. Not like Flynn wants to go the GoFundMe route or any of that.
And so Tom Cotton's running around, like I said, beating this drum about you're going to let this tidal wave of crime go at it. But like the government can amass this like unbelievable level of resources to torment you and just crush you down and grind you into some pulp. And what is Rush's history on this particular subject?
Well, Rush has had I think it's called Oxycontin.
Yes.
He had an abuse issue more than a decade ago. Actually, maybe close to 2 decades ago, back in the 90s. But anyway, whatever it was, he had an issue with overprescribing of that substance, and I'm not even clear what it does. So I'm speaking somewhat uninformed. But the more important point was that he was under investigation, and they were in the state of Florida where he lives, and they were attempting to prosecute him. And he, being a very wealthy individual, was able to amass similar resources to throw back at the state, and he was able to beat back their efforts. What he was talking about here with Michael Flynn, who he was talking about when he just said Flynn, Michael Flynn was the former national security advisor, one of the former, I don't know how many we've had with this administration in its 2 years, but he was the first national security advisor. And I forgot how many stars, but he was a general, United States National Security Advisor, distinguished military career, and he's just pled guilty and is going to be sentenced. And Rush was talking about the reason why people finally fold the tent and plead guilty. And what really troubles me about this is that Rush has the ability to see that this happens, but he apparently believes it only happens in isolated situations where you happen to have a conservative R in front of your name. He doesn't recognize that this is a systemic failure that we have, where the system is able to do this and does do this to many people. It's a routine way the system works because of the vastly superior resources that the prosecution apparatus and law enforcement apparatus has. And as the victims advocates continue to weaken the due processes that are available to you and the things you can do if you were to dare to go to trial, which you're going to get hammered harder if you do go to trial and lose, we end up with all these induced pleas that people just have to fold their tent. I happen to agree with Rush. I don't know enough about the Flynn case to know whether they have the goods on him or not, but I agree with him on the bigger picture that that's what the government can do. That's what a special prosecutor or a regular prosecutor can do. But I'm so sad that he can't recognize that it's a systemic problem. It's not isolated to Michael Flynn and Rush Limbaugh and the people who happen to have R's in front of their name that are on the receiving end of this special prosecutor. It's our failed system, Rush. Just like the prison system that incarcerates 8 times, it hands out sentences 8 times the average of the world, which Lindsey Graham said on Meet the Press that we played. It's the system, Rush. It's not an anomaly.
In one of the articles that I have listed from Vox, they listed. I want to say that if you let all of the people out of the federal side of the prison system and you still just maintained the state side, you would then only have one nation of El Salvador having more incarcerated people per capita than the United States. So we incarcerate 593 people per 100,000. The next nation is other developed nations. Canada is 114 people. We're 6 times higher than Canada. Germany is 76 and Japan is 41. We incarcerate so many flipping people. And this First Step Act only covers the federal side, which is about 10-ish or a little bit more than 10% of the population.
Of the prison population.
Right.
And that's the point I was going to draw together with the conservative side of the aisle. Fortunately, they did sign in to the First Step Act, or we went and got it done, and I commended President Trump for putting his political capital in play. I commend all the Republicans that voted for it. But the reason why we're in this mess is because we're all too willing to vote more resources for law enforcement. All they have to do is say, we need more prosecutors. We need more cops. We need more investigators. We need more crime labs. We need more vehicles. No matter what it is, they're ready and willing on the conservative side to just pour it at them. Oh, we need to erode this due process. This is a loophole for criminals. Oh, well, sure. We've had King Alexander, and he talks about every time they win something in court that strengthens the defense side, that they just go to the legislature and change it. The prosecutorial apparatus goes to the legislature and changes it. When everybody who's listening to me goes and votes conservative, just remember that these are the people who keep piling on. We wouldn't have the Department of Homeland Security if it weren't for the arguments made by George W. Bush saying that if you didn't vote for it, you were unpatriotic. And the Homeland Security Department is involved in so many things in the way of the federal prosecutions for internet crimes that it kind of makes me wonder what that has to do with Homeland Security.
Right.
But every single prosecution on the federal side seems to have Homeland Security involved in it. Maybe we need to cut the Homeland Security Department so they can focus their remaining resources only on securing the homeland and not internal prosecutions. Maybe that's an idea.
That would be an interesting idea nonetheless. And so we're doing this special episode to cover some of the things of the First Step Act. And I was reading some information about what Tom Cotton, because Tom Cotton was was the one that was really making all the noise. And if the way the numbers work to me is kind of odd. So they're going to allow for the increase of your good time from 47 or 49 days, I forget which one it is, up to like in the 50s. So you're going to get like 7 or 8 more days of good time per year for being a good inmate. But in total, it's going to extend out the reach of releasing about 6 or 7,000 more people per year. But we already release 1,700 people per day. There's 1,700 people get out of federal prison per day. So this doesn't, like, it's not some tidal wave of crime is going to be released onto the street. These are people that are doing the right things. I guess you could argue to say that they're doing the things that show that they are going to live the right way and have been rehabilitated, so to speak.
Well, the thing about the good time, there's when they passed, would have to roll back the clock to the 1980s under the Reagan administration, but when they passed the Criminal Justice Reform Act of, I believe it was 84, and anybody can correct me that if I got my year wrong, but they did a lot of criminal justice reform in 84. They did the Bail Reform Act, and I believe they did the Sentencing Reform Act of 84, where they abolished federal parole, and they instead substituted this good time. And as I understood, it was supposed to be 54 days, either 52 or 54 days, and somehow or other there's some incongruency in the statute, and the BOP's only been giving them like 47 days per year.
Okay, so then this just corrects the mistake.
That's my understanding. But
right, I'm with you.
The Sentencing Reform Act goes back a long time, and I have fairly vivid memories of it, but we're giving them a few more days of good time, which if you've got a 20-year sentence and you get an extra 7-8 days, that's going to roll your release date forward. If you do the calculations, you might would have been going to get out in December, and you may get moved up to late September or October.
Sure.
But you're going to get out. You're going to get out anyway.
Yes. 95. I don't know the number, but 95% of the people are going to get out of prison anyway. So. Do you want to spend $50,000 a year? I still struggle with like the economic argument of it. I just can't figure that one out.
Well, another component is supposed to do some good things for first time offenders in terms of doing away with those harsh minimum sentences. That's what I understand is in this version. And then they're supposed to do some reentry work to increase their reentry efforts to help these people successfully re-enter society.
Yeah, there is a piece of it that is going to allow for judges to have a lot more discretion in how they sentence the people. So that's one piece of it. And then my favorite one of all is that it is forbidden now for you to shackle a woman in labor or in postpartum.
And it's so tragic that we have to put that in statute.
I know.
The basic decency of humanity has fallen to such an all-time low that nobody in the Bureau of Prisons can say, put a policy on my directive, there will be no shackling of a woman giving birth in the entire Bureau of Prison system. End of discussion. Why did we have to go make a law for something that a person sitting as a policymaker could have done?
You have to think that when you see like a little plastic bag and it says, do not let children under the age of X play with this, the reason why they did that is because someone played with it and they had to go, Jesus, you couldn't have been that. You had to be that stupid to let your kid play with it. Of course, somebody's kid got hurt, and I'm not trying to be insensitive to that, but they had to make that to protect themselves because someone didn't have the common sense to handle the bag the right way. And this is the exact same thing. You had to go, well, why would the woman need to be able to like move and be comfortable while she's delivering a new life into this? It's like, what kind of we're assholes. I'll say it again. We've become assholes.
Well, I can tell you that no one wants to make it. There's one thing that's fairly common, certainly in governmental service, but in even in private sector, people get comfy in their jobs and no one wants to stick their neck out. And issuing that policy, if there were to ever be, and you can always sit around and dream up some imaginary boogeyman about this superbonic woman that would be able to endure all the pain of childbirth and might be able to launch an escape attempt or something. And therefore we just have a policy. We do this to everybody that's in our custody. And no one wants to look at the camera and say, yeah, you know what? I issued the policy and I'm very proud I did. It's what I would do, and I'm continuing to stick with the policy. Yes, we did have a bionic woman. It's the first time we had one in 1,000 years, and this was an anomaly. Don't expect it to happen again, and I have absolutely no intention of changing the policy. That doesn't lend itself to your bureaucratic career if you do that, because The person above you says, well, wait a minute, you just got through saying that you have no intention of changing the policy. Well, maybe you shouldn't be serving in government, because most of these officials are when you look at cabinet secretaries, who they serve, the governor or the president. And so no one wants to stick their neck out to say, well, I've made the decision and that's what we're going to do, and that's the policy, and that's what it'll be while I'm the director of the Bureau of Prisons. I don't mind losing my job. I'm quite comfortable that I can be employed, and if it costs me my job, it costs me my job. Very few people are willing to do that.
Right. And then I guess, to tie it into our particular issue, I'm pretty sure that the sexual offenses are going to be listed on the list of 50 things that are going to be exempt from these new rules and regulations.
I think that not all are.
Okay.
I think some survive, but yes, they did. As I understand, don't have enough analysis of this, but I think some did survive. And remember, we're still talking about the federal system, so all the people that are
of course
out there. This is not going to do anything for your harsh sentences in Alabama or Florida or Mississippi or Louisiana and all the South Dakota where they're getting 115 years for possession of child porn. This is not going to do anything directly. It can set the pace for you can come back and say, well, they changed the federal law and the sky didn't fall. But this is not going to have any direct impact on people who are serving these harsh sentences in state prisons.
Because I'm not going to say it's hard. It's just uncommon. It's kind of hard to get federal crimes that are related, because they're you're not committing a federal crime by going across the street and doing something inappropriate with the neighbor's kids. That's not a federal crime typically. But transporting a child or porn happens to invoke the interstate commerce clauses. Those are going to be the kind of things that would hit you with federal sexual offense crimes, right?
That would be correct. International, there'd be a federal connection in some capacity, being on a federal facility.
Right.
The Indian reservations, all of our Indian crimes, except for minor crimes, are prosecuted in the federal courts. But yes, it's not going to be the wide universe of sex offenses are going to be in state courts, and this is not going to have a direct impact other than you can tell your lawmakers in your capital, well, they just did this bipartisan act in Congress, and we can do it as well, and you might gain some traction.
Gotcha. And if you did it like on a military base or something like that, you could invoke some sort of federal charges too, right?
If you were military, you go through the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But if you're a civilian, sure, they might get you in the federal system if you did on a federal facility.
And just for some anecdotal on that, I sat on a jury trial where a woman shoplifted 2 or 3 DVDs from the Air Force base here in town, and she was brought up on federal charges because she did it at the exchange. And I was like, you shoplifted $60 worth of DVDs and you're now in federal court? Wow.
So as a general rule, I strongly encourage of course, I don't encourage any law breaking, but I strongly discourage you from, if you can do form shopping, more likely than not always, but more likely than not, you want to stay out of federal courts. The trains run on time.
Yeah.
They have vastly superior resources.
I can imagine.
Don't fall through the cracks, and they don't leave any T's or I's undotted or crossed. If they bring in federal court, they're going to end that case with a conviction. If they bring in state court, you might very well come out without a conviction, or with a much reduced charge in state court, depending on how good your legal representation is. But in federal court, you've been had.
And we didn't stick around for the sentencing side. We were only part of the actual conviction part of, or the determination. So I don't know how she came out, but I can only imagine that they would be able to. You would have awoken the sleeping giant, and you were a flea, and you irritated them, and they're going to come at you something spectacular.
Well, we like to have a little entertainment on this podcast, and I would tell people that if you have crazy crime stories, something we can tell in 2 to 3 minutes each episode, I love telling them. I don't have nearly as many because I'm not set up on my treadmill to watch crime stories when I'm exercising in the morning. I don't have the same TV setup, but like just one that's happened in Houston just this week. So this is Dateline Houston, Texas. As a general rule, I would suggest if you're going to be stealing $1,200 worth of meat product from a grocery store, this happened to be Kroger. But if you're going to be doing that, I strongly urge you not to litter, not to do anything that'll draw attention to your vehicle as it's fleeing the Kroger store or whatever grocery store. But this guy got pulled over. The thing that brought himself to the attention of the beat officer was he threw a can or something, bottle out the window, pulled him over, and then the call came over the radio of the description of the vehicle matched, and the officer says, "Well, have you been to Kroger today?" And he said, "Oh, no, sir. You mind if I look around?" And of course, the guy said, "No, I don't mind." And that's another thing I don't understand. If they ask you, "Do you mind if I look around?" Unless you have some belief that you can do like My Favorite Martian and make that meat disappear, you know that he's going to find the meat. For those who are too young, that was a show from the 60s where the guy had it was a Martian on Earth, and he had powers to make himself and things disappear. And so why would you give permission to look for the meat which you know is not going to vanish? Why wouldn't you tell the officer, "Well, no, officer, actually, I do mind if you look around," and force the officer to get a warrant? Because he may get the warrant, but there's all kind of things that can go in your favor while he's getting the warrant. A more important priority call can come in that'll divert the officer from your attention. If there's something major goes down and it's a small police force and they have to all officers respond. I mean, the DA may be too tired to get involved. It may be close to quitting time, and they may not have an on-call DA either. I mean, there's so many things where they wouldn't be able to get the warrant. So even though the officer says, "I can get a warrant," say, "Officer, I really appreciate that you can get the warrant, and that's what I'm going to ask you to do today, because I can't give you permission to search my vehicle without the warrant." And the officer may be getting their quitting time. He may have a hot day. Any number of things can cause the officer not to search your car. But I can be reasonably certain that if you have the contraband, it will not vanish between the time you get permission and the time they do the search. I'm fairly certain of that.
Do you happen to know anything about the charges under the sex offender side of things that would be excluded? Do you happen to know that?
I do not. I'm hoping that some of our listeners that have followed this with more intensity will shoot those to us over the Christmas New Year's break.
I'll tell you this. Do you remember? I don't know if it was 6 months ago. We talked about a woman on the podcast whose husband his health was seriously deteriorating, and she is perfectly willing to be his caregiver. So, and as I recall, like there's already a program for it. You can apply, but like one person a year gets it or something like that. Do you recall that topic?
Not really. I've got
there's
old timers.
Yeah, I know. Especially since you're talking about a show where they had hand cranks for the cameras. But it says expand compassionate release by reducing the minimum age of prisoners eligible for elderly release from 65 to 60. But I remember that person being around that age, maybe around 70, and so he was. I don't know if his diabetes or whatever was. Anyway, I just happened to notice that, and I wanted to bring it up because we've covered a topic about that. I'm looking, Laura. So we got the chat. We got the question in chat. We had a very lively chat on Discord this afternoon before we recorded this. But she asked that question. I'm looking for an answer, and I don't have anything that says what the different crimes are that have been excluded.
We're going to try to find out more by the next recording. But this is not a done deal. There's two different bills: the Senate resolution and the House resolution. And an identical bill has to pass both,
right?
And a reform bill has passed both, but not an identical bill. So
hang on, wait a minute, stop. So the Senate still has to vote on this again?
Well, that's what I was about to tell you.
Okay, sorry.
An identical bill has to pass both sides of the rotunda, and you can achieve that by going into conference with the two different bills, which is very time consuming. We don't have a lot of time right now. They could appoint a committee of conferees from both sides to try to come up with an identical bill, the two different bills, and bring those together and bring them back, and you get to simply vote to adopt the report of the conferees, and that's that cloak and dagger vote that people think that happens. It's so sinister. Boy, they just do a voice vote because that's the only thing you can do when you have two different bills and you try to merge them through a conference committee, is you get to vote to adopt the report of the conferees. I'm not thinking that's going to be the likely trajectory of this because of the calendar. I'm thinking they're going to send the Senate bill over to the House, because that way, if the House will approve something close to this bill, then it can simply come back to the Senate for concurrence, and then it's an identical bill. That's what I think will probably happen, but we're not to the finish line yet because the same bill hasn't passed both sides.
More smoke and mirrors and mysticism and magic.
No smoke and mirrors at all. There's nothing smoke and mirror about it. We have a bicameral legislative process, and the same thing has to pass both chambers. There's nothing smoky and mirror about it. It's the process.
Yeah, I understand. It's just an archaic process. It's complicated.
Nothing archaic about it. It's the way that it was designed to keep bad legislation from passing.
Obviously, that has failed dramatically.
It has. You don't have a count of how many thousands and thousands of bad bills never get passed. Only a fraction of what's introduced in legislative chambers ever make it to the finish line and get to the executive's desk. So it actually works quite nicely.
Why haven't you stopped them all?
Well, I do stop plenty.
But only in your state. You need to go to all 50 plus the state capital and do it too.
Oh, the U.S. Capitol, but there's
what I meant.
There's plenty that I don't have anything to do with that get killed. And our state, with our system as robust as it's set up for being efficient at killing bills, a lot of stuff gets killed without a lot of help because it has to go through so many committees, and it's deliberately designed that way to try to ferret out bad legislation. You don't ferret it all out, but if you don't have the robust process we have, a lot more bad stuff will get through. We don't have a lot of the problems in my state. When people say, "Well, juveniles are indelible," well, we don't have that problem here. Juveniles are getting. No, we don't do that here. Well, we got no, we don't have that problem here. The people are getting 110 years. Well, we don't have that problem. I mean, I go on and on. Well, we managed to kill all of that stuff here. Well,
right.
All these due process issues. People say, well, we wish we had. Well, we actually have that here. The statute of limitations has not been abolished here. We do kill a lot of bad stuff here. And of course, bad is from our perspective.
Yeah, of course. I was out getting my car fixed today, and they were listening to a show on NPR called Political Rewind, and it may just be a local Georgia show, but I don't know which governor it was, and I hope that you can fill in the gaps. But he was saying, "Oh, the heck with this 3 strikes law. If you get your second chance and you don't take advantage of it and you screw up again, that's it. You're done." He was saying, we'll throw all of it at you, whether it was Zell Miller or one of those other guys back then. I don't know which one it was.
It actually goes back a little bit before Zell.
Okay.
And his name is escaping me, but I remember the governor saying it, and he was trying to out-conservative the conservatives because Georgia was such a conservative state. It's certainly becoming a lot more
purplish.
Yes, but at that time, he had a dual name, which is quite common in the South. The governor that said that it wasn't Joe Frank Harris.
Roy Barnes, Ron?
I think it was Barnes. Yeah, it wasn't Joe Frank.
Okay,
it was Barnes. I think it was Roy Barnes who said that hell with 3 strikes. He said, why not 2? Yes, of course, Georgia ran their prison population through the stratosphere with that policy.
Yep.
And they still got this like 7 sins where you have to serve every single day.
Mm-hmm. There's like 7 deaths.
Yeah. Yes. And you got to serve every.
Absolutely. And that was probably also the same guy that took all of the rec programs out of, it just turned it into a warehouse facility. That's pretty much all it is.
So, but now just to be fair, Georgia and even Mississippi at one time were on the progressive side of prison management at one time. They're not there now, but if people want to do some Googling, you can look for Dr. Alan Alt, A-U-L-T. He was the head of Georgia prisons. He headed several state prison systems, but Georgia was one. I think maybe South Carolina, maybe Mississippi. But Dr. Alt was he was very progressive. They have not always been in the dark ages, but they moved the way the people moved. The people got tired of all this damn liberal do-good mumbo jumbo mollycoddling criminals, and they demanded that criminals be. But you look at Mississippi, I think they were the innovator on conjugal visits at one time. Can you imagine that? And the Georgia director of prisons became the director of prisons in Mississippi before Alt Ellis McDougall, his name was, and he went over and I believe ran Mississippi prisons, and I think he was followed by Dr. Alt, who went from Georgia to Mississippi and followed McDougall. And I have great admiration for Alan Alt. He was a very, very good man, and you can find YouTube interviews on him where he said that he has come to realize, even though he executed however many people he said, being the head of corrections, that he was wrong. That he said, I've learned that it doesn't give the people the satisfaction and closure that they think it's going to do. And he said, once the execution, that void is still there. And so Alan Alt is one of my favorites from that side of the quote.
I think we had a quote from Anthony Kennedy similar to that. I think.
Justice, we had a retired justice.
Yeah, we just it was one of the closing quotes from one of the podcasts. But all right, so we're at 51 minutes. Cut out a little bit, add a little bit. Do we have anything else?
Oh, we just have tons of things to do. We could go to the live chat and see who wants to talk to us. And
we're pretty much done with that. They've all left. You ran them all away.
I ran them all off, except
for one.
Who did I not run out of?
I will leave that to be anonymous for the time being.
Listen,
podcast listeners, I want to wish you all the most happy of holidays ever possible. I know it's a tough time of year for many of our people. I've been receiving some emails from some of our listeners that they're kind of struggling here or there. Please know that my heart goes out to you, and I wish that you're safe. I wish that you're warm. I wish that you're healthy, and maybe you have some friends. Maybe you have some solitude and presence and family and all that. And I from the bottom of my heart, I wish you the best of holidays.
Well, maybe we can do a shout out for the NARSL support Christmas Eve, Christmas Day that they're doing for.
Sure.
I don't have the goods on it, but it will be promoted. I think it's on the website that they're going to have from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day the volunteer line active for anybody who feels lonely and isolated. We're going to have supportive people ready to talk to you because it's very difficult for people through the holidays, particularly when they don't have family.
Let me, here's the phone number. The phone number will be 888-997-7765, and the extension is number 2. And as Larry said, it's from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., both the 24th and the 25th. There are going to be 3 volunteers. Look, man, they've got families too, so if you call in and they're not available, give them some time. They may be on the phone with somebody else. They may be eating some food or watching some sports, whatever. But call back maybe in 20 or 30 minutes, and hopefully you'll get through.
Well, it would be rare that they wouldn't get through because we would have to have 3 simultaneous calls going, which would be unlikely.
I understand.
Not impossible. But yeah, it's going to roll for the first person. If they're talking, it would roll to the second volunteer in that shift, and then the third volunteer. And then if all 3 volunteers are busy, then it would go to voicemail. But we're hoping that they won't be that. I mean, we're hoping we meet the need, but I can't imagine we're going to have 3 or 4 simultaneous calls.
And I will also, I'm getting the link now, and I will put that in the show notes as well.
And this was in lieu of the conference call we did last year, which turned in it didn't turn out the way I'd hoped. It was a lot more of a gripe session. I was wanting to hear messages of hope, and I got a lot of messages of gripe, but the message of hope was what I was hoping, and people could give some inspirational stuff for the new year. It was not quite what I'd hoped for.
Otherwise, hey folks, have a happy new year, and share the podcast at registrymatters.co. And if you want to leave us some voicemail, crazy crime stories or something like that, 747-227-4477. Shoot us an email message at registrymatterscast@gmail.com. And of course, the best way to support the show, even $1 is awesome, is patreon.com/registrymatters.
So those things, we want to be able to turn it into a generalized rule. We want to say, as a general rule, don't do this. So that to me is the most entertaining.
Yes, of course.
As a general rule, don't throw stuff out the window when you're in the process of committing a crime. That's probably not a good plan.
Would it be okay to run like a bacon fryer after you go steal all the food like that? Because you can be like driving down the road, you could be cooking some bacon, and the cop's like, bacon. And they track you down that way?
So one of these days I'll have to tell the one about the guy who was a serial killer, and he got mad that they weren't giving him credit for all people he killed that he got himself caught by calling the police to complain.
Yes, of course.
Yes, he said he was irritated at the undercount they had. They were proud of their work. He wanted to make sure he got credit for everything.
Definitely. Well, that's all I've
Merry
got, Larry.
Christmas, happy holidays, joyful Kwanzaa, whatever type of celebration to everybody. And thank you so much for your loyal support for the past year.
Thank you so much, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.